The date today is November 21st, 2016. The location is the Yankee Air Museum in Belleville, Michigan. The time is 12:53 p.m. Today, the person being interviewed is Betty Hornschemeyer. Betty was born on March 9th, 1923, and she worked at Briggs Manufacturing in Detroit, Michigan during World War II on the home front. The interview will be conducted by Mackenzie Campbell. This interview is being brought to you by the generosity of the Yankee Air Museum and Eastern Michigan University, and is being conducted on behalf of the Oral History Department at the Yankee Air Museum in Belleville, Michigan. Welcome, Betty. Thank you for taking the time to be here with me today. So I know you prepared a story, so I'd like you to start with that, and then I can ask you some questions from there.
Okay. I was born, I'm Betty Hornschemeyer, and I was born March the 9th, 1923, on a farm in northern Minnesota, one of 10 children. My first 2 children passed away with the flu in 1918. Let me tell you how I arrived in Detroit, Michigan to become a Rosie the Riveter. In 1929, a tornado devastated our farm. Then we had a drought, and then the Depression hit, and the farm was eventually auctioned off. I had a sister that was in 1940, who was living in Detroit, Michigan. She had a 2-year-old and needed surgery. So my Arliss, my sister, was a year older than me, just graduated from high school, and she decided to go and help my sister. Well, my father was not working very well at that time, so he decided to go along also. They had no money to travel, so they got a ride with a truck driver who drove an auto carrier to Detroit, picking up new cars regularly. So that's how they arrived in Michigan. In September of 1941, they had both found employment and sent for the rest of the family. So we put a tent and a mattress on the back of that auto carrier, and my mother, my sister, 3 brothers rode for 2 days to arrive in Detroit. In 1942, my 2 brothers joined the Navy. One lost his life in Okinawa. My sister and I decided we would like to join the Waves, but my father said, no, that's 2 is enough. My mother at that time was an air raid warden. She walked up and down the street to be sure people had their windows closed and lights off. So my sister and I decided that we would do something. So we went to the United Aircraft Training Center and learned how to rivet. In October of 1942, we were hired by Briggs Manufacturing on Connors Avenue in Detroit. We were the first women that went into that plant. They were doing B-17 wingtips and Douglas nose cones and ailerons. We were partnered with one man. The first man I had his name was John Pollock, a very nice man. It was quite different at that time for 2 naive farm girls to be put together with a bunch of shop men. So they tricked us in little kinds of things and so forth, but they finally knew that we could do our job, and they respected us for that. We had no incidents. And one day when I was riveting, my gun slipped off the rivet and made a hole in the wing. And right away the men said, oh, you're going to be charged with sabotage. Well, we had to call an engineer to come and write up the repair. And that engineer turned out to be my husband, whom I married 2 years later. I worked with John for some time, and then when there were more women arrived, I received another partner, and her name was Angie Tutka, and she came from Romeo. We worked together till 1943 on the wingtip. And sometime late in 1943, my sister and I were moved to the second floor to the Douglas aircraft, where we worked on the nose cones and the ailerons. We were inspectors at that time. This is where we met our friend Lottie Kukab. We worked together. We joined a bowling league, so we got to know more women in the plants. Our job was to check on the rivets to be sure they were spaced properly, also that there were no cracks. And the other thing was the alignment of the struts inside of the ailerons. We worked there till late in 1944, when the plant closed, and we moved on. My sister and I went to IBM at that time and learned how to run their tabulators. And we worked at SS Kresge's main office doing that. And we worked there until January of 1946, when my sister got married, and I left in June of 1946, and I went out and married my engineer. We were blessed with 4 children, 7 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. We had 67 years of marriage, and he passed away 3 years ago at the age of 96. It's been a wonderful journey. I appreciate your listening to my story. Life is great.
Thanks so much, Betty Ann. I'm excited to ask you a few questions that I heard you talk about. So you said that when the gun slipped off and you made a hole in the plane, your partner said something about you were going to be charged with sabotage.
Right.
Did he mean that seriously, or?
I think it was all done in good fun. We never had any issues of men and the women. I think they learned to respect us as women, and they were careful with their language when we were around, and they weren't telling any jokes like they would normally do. We gained their respect.
That's awesome. Then the other thing I wanted to ask you about was, you said the plant closed in 1944. Do you know why it closed?
Well, it was towards the end of the war, and they were no longer making the parts, and that's why it was closed.
Okay, so it just wasn't needed anymore?
No.
Okay. That's so awesome that you said 4 children, 7 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren.
Right.
That's awesome. And then I just want to ask you a couple more demographic questions, but at any time, please feel free to not answer any of my questions. Do you have a religious affiliation or a church that you?
Yes, I am. I'm a Lutheran.
Lutheran? Okay. And then what did your parents do before you moved to Michigan from Minnesota?
They just farmed, and my father did all kinds of different things. He was a potato buyer, and he was a commercial fisherman. He did all kinds of things to support that family.
Cool. So do you remember anything about what Michigan was like when you first moved here?
Well, to me, it was huge. Temperature-wise, it was pretty much the same, except winters were a little colder in Minnesota, a little more snow and so forth. But yeah, we enjoyed it. We loved living in the city.
Nice. Do you know any stories or legends about the Detroit area? Or is there anything in particular that you remember about Detroit?
Not necessarily. I think the one thing that we found was very different coming to a city was that we lived on a lower flat, and the people that lived upstairs and the people next door to them didn't really know one another. They didn't mingle. Mm-hmm. And we were so used to being large family gatherings and so forth. So my mother had coffee hours and invited people in and so forth, and kind of changed the whole atmosphere of the neighborhood.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. Did you have any idea of what you wanted to be when you were a child? Like, what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you know?
Not really. I think at one time I wanted to work in corrections with, I had an uncle that was the chief of police and so forth, and we used to correspond, and I thought that that would be an interesting career, but it never happened.
So you told me where you worked, and that you worked on the plane tips, right? Is that the only part of the plane that you worked on?
Well, at that time, that's what Briggs was manufacturing, were the wing tips for B-17s.
Okay. And how did you find out about this job opening?
I don't know how we really found out about the training program, but I don't really remember how we came onto that was.
Okay. And you said you were kind of motivated to go into the training because of your brother.
Right.
Right. Is there anything else that you remember being significant that kind of drove you to do that?
No, we just wanted, both of us at that time were waitresses, and we were looking for something different and wanted to be part of the war effort.
And how old were you when you went into the training program?
19.
19. Oh. What did you do on a day-to-day basis at work? Like, what would be a normal work day like for you?
Well, we did our riveting, and we had a short break at one time. We all went to a dining room or an area where we had our lunches. We brought our lunch, and we met different people at that time.
How did you travel to work? How did you go?
We walked for 2 blocks to this street, bus line on Mack Avenue, and then we had about a 2-block walk after we got off.
Oh, okay. Because I just remember reading something about how people would get to work, so we were just wondering how that happened.
The streetcars went right down past our house at that time.
Mm-hmm. Did anybody in your household worry about your safety when you were traveling to work?
Pardon?
Did anybody in your household worry about your safety when you were traveling to work?
No. No. It was never an issue at that time.
What were some of the conditions like at work? Like, did you have to have like physical strength, or kind of what was the process of riveting like?
I think we just learned how to handle our rivet guns, because that's pretty much what we did. And so it didn't take anything special.
Did you think, was your job rewarding or fun, or?
Well, I think the camaraderie at that particular time, there wasn't much we did for entertainment, but go to the movies with our friends and joining the bowling league and that sort of thing.
Cool. So can you tell me a little bit more about this bowling league that you said you were on with Lottie?
Yeah, we took a streetcar to Hamtramck from where we lived on the east side of Detroit. And we had, I don't know, there must have been 50 or 60 people in our league. And it was probably the highlight of our week when we bowled.
That's fun. Was there anybody that was super memorable that you worked with during the war?
No, I think probably it was my first experience working with black people. And we never had any issues with that, even in the lunchroom or anything. That was different for me.
What do you think was the most significant thing that you learned from the place that you worked?
I don't know, I think it was just the idea that we could come into a plant like that and work with these different people that we don't know and had different cultures, and the camaraderie was great. We just enjoyed one another.
That's awesome. Do you know about how many people worked in the Briggs plant?
I have no idea how many people were at that plant.
Okay. Did you know any women who didn't go into the war effort?
Oh yes, I had friends I have a friend that was in the Army and a friend that was in the Navy, and other than that, I hadn't been there too long to make a lot of friends before we went in there.
Did you know any women who got pregnant while you were
No.
working? You didn't have children until after you were...
Right, I wasn't married at that time.
Right, so it was after you got married and that you had children.
Right.
So how did you manage doing housework along with having your job? What was kind of your work-life balance?
That was not a big deal because we lived at home and my father worked afternoons, and we filled in and did what we needed to do to help my mother, but it wasn't like working women today.
What's your perception of working women today when you say that?
I think the working women today should have equal pay for equal jobs. I'm a little bit concerned about how the women's seem to kind of put down the men and so forth. I'm not very happy with that part of it. But otherwise, if a woman has a job, it can work and still take care of her family. That's fine by me.
That's awesome. Did you know anybody who grew a victory garden?
No.
No. I read about them in the reading, so I just wondered if they were popular in the area.
Remember.
Do you remember anything about the rationing policies during the war?
Well, my mother had rationing books all the time, and she took care of them so that we were able to deal with it. But I didn't do anything with it. My mother took care of that.
Oh, okay. You said that there was a lot of camaraderie among the coworkers that you worked with. Did you find that with the management too, or was there a real big hierarchy?
No, I think everybody, I know many times we went on picnics and so forth, and there would be people from the office and different, so there was no distinguishing between who had the good job and who didn't.
Yeah. Were you a member of a union?
Yes, we joined the union, and my sister and I weren't too happy about it, but when we decided not to go to a meeting, they called us scabs. So we always went to the meetings, and the stop steward would come around and check to see if we had any issues going on and so forth, but other than that, when we left the plant, we left the union.
Now, were you in a leadership position in the union, or you were just in it?
No.
You said that they called you scabs?
That was, if you weren't a union member or you objected to the union, that was the name they called you.
So, what happened when the plant closed and then you went to IBM? So then what happened after that?
Well, we worked at IBM, like I said, till 1946, and we ran the tabulators, and I kind of like to think that they were the pre-computer times. We had to learn how to wire the boards to take out a cash report for certain departments and that sort of thing, and ran the sorters from the key punch cards and that sort of thing. And then in 1946, in January, I went out to California and married my engineer. And my sister went to Minnesota, married her soldier. She had 3 daughters, 5 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. She still lives in Minnesota. We lived in California for about a year and a half. My husband had an aeronautical degree, worked for Douglas Aircraft out there. And I was homesick, so we came back to the Midwest. And he went to work for Detroit Edison. He worked for Detroit Edison building power plants until he retired.
So, did you have another job after?
No, I never worked after that.
Okay. Did you want to go back to work, or did you enjoy being at home raising your kids?
Well, all my sisters worked. I was the only one that didn't work. And so I thought I should get a job. And my youngest son was 10 years old at that time. And then I became pregnant. And so that took care of it. I didn't have to go back to work.
So how did your day-to-day routine change after the war was over?
I don't know, we spent a lot of time on Belle Isle at the concerts and so forth, and we rode horseback, we canoed, we ice skated, all those kinds of things. Belle Isle was close for us, and it was a beautiful spot. Spent a lot of time there.
What was the most empowering moment that you've had in the course of your life?
I don't know, just raising a family and proud of who they have become and so forth.
That's awesome. Did you notice any significant changes in the culture of America after the war was over?
Oh, definitely, definitely. There were a lot of people out of work when the war finished and the plants closed and so forth. And many of those people that were working during the war needed employment. And they had come from different parts of the country to work, and so now they had to make a living. And I think that changed it with the women working out of the home.
Interesting. Did you know women, so you said you knew a lot of women who worked outside the home after the war. Do you think their experiences in America were really different than yours?
I suppose there were different areas where they went in where they were challenged a little bit more. But I didn't know of anybody that really had a problem with it.
Do you have any idea of what those challenges might have been, if there were?
Well, probably competing for a job with a man or something, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Did you ever think that, as a child, did you think that you would see the day that a woman got nominated to a national party for president?
No. But probably in my lifetime,
you thought you would
Lord willing, I might see that. If the person is qualified, I have no problem with that.
Yeah, it's interesting over the course of kind of the periods we've talked about. Is there anything else that you'd like to?
It was such a different time growing up. Now when I look at my children, my grandchildren, and what they are faced with today, all the instant gratification and impatient for things to be happening and so forth, where I came from, we didn't have radio much. We listened to the farm report on a battery radio and so forth. We could go to the movies at that time, and that would be a dream. You never thought you could ever do any of those things. Today, young people can go to a movie or watch on TV, and they see everybody has it, and they want it. It was different for us. It was not something we felt we could ever achieve. totally different atmosphere and so forth today.
What were some of the movies that you used to see at the theater?
Oh, I can't remember. We didn't see too many. We used to have on a Saturday night in the small town free movies that we would sit in the yard. It was almost like a drive-in, only so the farmers would bring their children in, and we ended up watching the movies at night, covered so we didn't get eaten up by the mosquitoes.
Cool.
I think the one movie I enjoyed probably the most was Alexander's Ragtime Band. That one stuck with that. Otherwise, we saw a lot of westerns and that sort of thing.
Was that just what was available
Right.
in your area? Okay. Cool. Were there other things you like to do in your spare time or that you enjoy doing in your spare time now?
Well, I like to bake, and I like to quilt. Not good at it, but I like to. I've always sewed clothes for my children when they were young and so forth.
Did you find the popular image of Rosie the Riveter that you see with the headband and the denim shirt, was that kind of the outfit that you wore?
I don't think we ever thought of ourselves like that until that picture came out.
Interesting. What do you mean you didn't see yourself like that? Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, we were just girls doing our job, you know. And in this particular plant, we didn't have to wear a uniform of any kind. We just wore slacks and a blouse with our bandana. And that was probably just to protect our hair from getting caught in a rivet gun or whatever. Never thought too much about it until they came up with the Rosie River image.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that image represents your experience, or do you think that just looks like an image?
That was just kind of fun.
It was just kind of fun.
Yeah.
It's such a popular image even still today.
Yeah.
That we see in history textbooks.
Yeah, but we didn't see that at that time.
Interesting. Were there other images or propaganda that you saw during the war about women working?
I don't think so. I can't think of anything. No, just the idea that we just did what we needed to do at that time. Didn't think too much about it other than you wanted to help and you did what you could do.
And so for you, doing what you could do was become a riveter.
Right.
That's awesome. Do you think that that's changed in how we see our society, that now there's something different about that?
I think so. I think the expectations are so much greater today for families and women in particular. They're getting more education than we did. I only knew, at that time, I only knew a few people that ever went to college. And now, and I think probably the trend should be a little bit more, not to push college, but to push vocational things and so forth, so we have people that feel like they're still producing even if they don't have a college education.
Do you feel like the riveting training that you got was more vocational kind of training?
Right.
That's interesting. So you didn't know very many women who went to college?
Not too many until in my later years after I got married, but when I was a single woman, I didn't.
Interesting. What was it like to be a single woman during the war?
Well, we just had to do a lot of things on our own. We, like I said, ice skated and roller skated and rode horseback at Belle Isle and that sort of thing. There weren't too many men around to date at that point. My husband happened to be around because he had polio, so he was not eligible to be in the war.
Oh, okay. So were many of the men who worked in the plant with you not eligible to be in the war, or do you have any idea?
Pardon?
Do you know if some of the men that worked in the plant with you, do you know if they were all eligible to be in the war or couldn't be in the war?
Well, they had different grades and so forth, so certain health problems and so forth eliminated them from being in the service.
Were any of the women interested in being in the front lines? Or?
No, I don't think I ever heard about that at all. No.
That's interesting. Is there anything else you can think of that you want to share?
No, I just remember a lot of funny little things that happened when we were there. One of the things I remember, the men always chewed tobacco. And one day I was inspecting a job, and this man spit his tobacco, and it came down the side of my face, and I walked around the jig and looked at him, and he was so mortified that it got to be a funny joke. But there were just little incidents like that that'll come to your mind from time to time, and think how funny that was, and today probably someone would take issue with it.
Wow, that's so interesting. Well, thank you very much
You're welcome.
being a part of this interview.
I appreciate hearing my story, and I'm grateful that I've had such a good life.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.